West Virginia urban gardener. I'm Steve, and today we are going to prune, or not to prune. And specifically what we're going to prune or defoliate, whichever term you want to use, we're going to do peppers and tomatoes, or tomatoes. Tomatoes, my daughter would say. But anyway, here we have some peppers in sort of in their different stages along their growth. Some, yes, we can prune, and some we will not prune. Why prune a pepper in the first place? Well, the big thing with a pepper is that the peppers will start to grow big, they grow large, they grow heavy, they grow top heavy, and sometimes if they get too top heavy, then they tip over and they have to be staked, or you end up breaking the main branch. Another reason to prune peppers is to make it a much more bushy type plant, which will certainly produce you a lot more peppers than a single leggy plant. So examples of what I'm talking about as far as a very leggy plant. If you look at this pepper here, you can see that there's a whole lot of stem, not much in the way of these side leaves. So this is a plant that's going to get very top heavy, and it may get up to 6-7 inches high before it actually starts to produce any type of peppers. On the other hand, you see a pepper plant such as this, which is already starting to produce peppers here at the top, and it's not nearly as leggy. You can see that these have a nice solid stem. So I have a few different types of peppers here. We're going to start off with a couple of sweet peppers at Anaheims. Now, a lot of people who prune their peppers will solely prune the hot peppers, but you can prune sweet peppers as well. And I'm going to show you an example of a such thing, but you got to be careful in the peppers that you are pruning, and I'll show you an example of that a little bit later. So you see, take this pepper plant here for example, very leggy. You have few leaves that are growing there, so this is going to be a very top heavy plant here. And this is just a regular sweet pepper, and actually this is just a regular, just your garden variety sweet pepper. So what I want to do is I want all of that energy to go up into the stem to produce peppers, and I don't want it to grow all up here to be top heavy, again tipping over, and then not get to production. I want production everywhere, so I want a bushier plant. So what I look for is anywhere from 2 to 4 leaves, and you're going to grow new stems right into it. If you get close into here, you can see that these are starting to grow in little stems, and these will grow into stems that will produce your fruit. So I don't want this to be a top heavy plant, and I want I like at least 3 to 4 leaves here. So I have really 1 there, 2 there, 3 there, and 4 there. So I am going to trim this. Now it seems like it's a plant suicide, but this will grow back, I promise you. And this is a Anaheim, and I'm going to show you what a more mature Anaheim looks like. With the Anaheim, they tend to have a very strong base stem, and there's a multitude of varieties of the Anaheim tomato or Anaheim pepper. And you can see here, if you look closely, that this is already starting to produce your fruit, and it's maybe 5 inches tall and has a strong root system. So this does not necessarily need to be pruned. Now, as we come over here, we see some of our more leggy type plants here, and we see a whole lot. We take this one for example here. You see there's a whole lot of stem, not much on the fruit end. This is one that we want to prune because this is one we want to be a little bushier, we want to be stronger base. Now I need my 3 to 4 leaves. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I want to get that just a centimeter or 2 above that split, and I do it just at a slight angle. And I do it at a slight angle, lets the water kind of run off so it doesn't all build and sit there at the top. But this is all again to produce a bushier type plant. Another example, let's see, here we've got a plant that's getting really leggy, but it's starting to produce and branch out just a little bit more. But we have this that's going to produce leaves here, main stem there, we have a couple leaves there. So we have a good base, 3 leaves coming on a 4th as we're producing here, and then we've got this long stem that's really not doing us too much of good. So we are going to cut and prune there. Again, to produce us a bushier type. So this will branch out, this will branch out here, and this will branch out here. So we'll get a much bushier type pepper. Now these peppers here, they're long, they're tall, but you can see a lot of growth into these areas here. Now I could have done this much earlier and trimmed down to make these a bushier type of pepper, but these are of an Anaheim variety. So to kind of look at an Anaheim variety and what it might look like, we're going to walk around here and we're going to take a look at the stronger stems. Now these are Anaheim peppers, and you can see that they have a very strong stem system, and you'll have peppers that will come out along those branching stems. And these are very characteristic to the Anaheim varieties, as opposed to some of the your regular kind of sweet bell pepper varieties, which may not have that nice strong stem, so you may want to trim those down a bit. And some of these of course are going to need some trimming to get them a little bushier, particularly here where I've got a long stem here, but I'm not really producing too much in the way of any kind of fruit. So I count by 1, 2, 3, 4, and cut slightly. There, same here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those will produce a lot bushier type. As you can see, that some of these have already started to do. So, as far as pruning peppers go, it's good to prune a couple times throughout the season. You do not have to prune if you like your peppers a little leggy, or if you get a variety that doesn't require it, such as the Anaheim variety. You do not have to prune those peppers. It is clearly an option just to create a little bushier plant. So next, we're going to go to tomatoes. Tomatoes are a plant that certainly I would encourage pruning. Now, the important thing with tomatoes is knowing what type of tomatoes, not whether you have Romas or grape or lemon or tomatillas. It's not that variety of tomatoes that we're looking at. We're basically talking about determinate versus indeterminate. And your determinate tomatoes are those type of tomato plants that has a determined lifespan. In other words, it's going to grow to a certain height, and it's going to have a certain lifespan to where you're going to grow some tomatoes and then the plant's going to die. And you might get one, maybe two crops of the determinate tomatoes. In those tomatoes, you do not want to prune. Unless one factor, and this applies to all tomatoes, and that's if the leaf is touching the ground. That's the only time you really should prune a determinate tomato plant. The indeterminate tomato plants, on the other hand, you do want to prune. And you want to prune for a couple of reasons. Number one, when you have a leaf that is touching into the ground, that leaf can pick up pests and other diseases, particularly blight, where the soil can be very moist. And any leaves, my philosophy on that is that any leaf that is touching the ground from a tomato plant, we trim. So there is, or rather we prune. There is no, so we clean off any of those plants, as you can see here, that it's touching into that ground there. We will cut that. Again here, we will cut. So not only does trimming those and pruning those leaves off reduce the risk of pests and diseases to your plant, but it also helps for aeration through the base of the plant. And again, that reduces the moisture on the leaves, which can lead to diseases. So airflow through a tomato plant is, through any of your plants for that matter, is very important. Particularly, like I said, particularly important with tomato plants. The other thing is that it allows the energy to go up to the top of the plant, to the area where we're going to produce our fruit. And after all, that's why we grow what we grow, and that's to produce more fruit. Now, people often ask about suckers. What do you do with suckers? What are suckers? What do they look like? Well, I've done some, let's see if we can find a few suckers. Okay, so let's take this plant for example here. Now this is an indeterminate plant. We have some that are touching the ground here. We'll certainly get rid of those. But what we also see is this extra growth here. This is what we call a sucker. Okay, the problem with the sucker is that will actually grow a new tomato plant, but it will suck energy from the remainder of the plant. And we want all our energy to go to that fruit to produce stronger, bigger fruit. So as the plant starts to grow, I will pinch off those suckers and discard that. And that will help the energy to go up towards the towards the main stem and to produce bigger, stronger fruit. Now there is a point, and see here another sucker there. We are going to just snap that off here. There is a point where I do let the suckers remain, and when I get to about half, maybe 2/3 of the height that I'm going to allow this tomato plant to grow, I will stop cutting off the suckers, because at that point I don't care if the tomato plant bushes out and grows new tomato plants. I've got my main stem, I've got all the energy going to that area, so we're going to be just fine. It's when that plant is just starting to grow and just starting to produce tomatoes, and you can see these tomato plants aren't very high and very tall, but they are producing tomatoes, and I want all the energy to continue to go to that area. So, to answer the question, to prune or not to prune, when it comes to pepper plants, it's really a matter of preference. Be familiar with the pepper plant that you're planting. If it has a strong stem, and again, some of the Anaheim varieties, which I know are very popular, you may not have to trim, you may not want to trim. For some of the uh, more leggy type, um, thin stem uh, pepper varieties, you may want to prune those plants early to produce a bushier, stronger base, and you'll certainly get more fruit from that. And then with regard to the tomatoes, anything that touch rule of thumb, any leaf that touches the ground, you prune. For your determinate tomatoes, no need to prune. For your indeterminate tomatoes, you want to pinch off the suckers and until you reach near a height where you want your tomato plant to grow. You want to keep the airflow good through the base of the tomato, and then if you have a leafy part of the tomato plant where you're worried about getting good sunlight or air through, and these will be leaves that grow slightly downward as opposed to leaves that grow upward. They will be these leaves here. You can actually trim those leaves back to create a little more airflow. And one thing I would caution you to do, especially on younger plants, don't go overly aggressive on pruning your tomato leaves, because it does need the leaves to get the energy in. So prune, be happy, be careful. So to prune or not to prune tomatoes, peppers, is that the question? Now you got the answer. Happy gardening from West Virginia Urban Gardener. This is Steve saying have a good one.